Welcome to CCNA in 60 days. The book is version 4 if you want to get a copy on Amazon. It's on Kindle and printed. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you can see all the other videos and courses we release. So on day 41, we're looking at security threats from a basic to advanced level and user education. A lot of this is the new stuff that's been added to the CCNA from the previous version. So a lot more security stuff as well as policies and training and stuff. All the usual stuff. Today, threat mitigation and advanced threats also. A lot of crossover with the CompTIA Security Plus and the Cisco Cyber Ops exams. There's 3 books that will help you get through the CCNA exam. The IP Subnetting 101 Labs, the Zero to Guru, and there's 101 Labs version 4 also. So that's all for today. We're going to go into the lessons and I will see you tomorrow.
Network security, threat mitigation, and user education. And if that word is new to you, the first thing we're going to talk about is what threat mitigation means. We're then going to identify some of the steps in a good protection strategy. These include developing strong security policies, monitoring the threats on your network, something that we've talked about in the past, a hugely important one, educating users, since almost all the threats we've talked about in some way, shape, or form have to do with what we call social engineering. In other words, getting someone to do what you want them to do. For instance, give them your password. Automating scanning and updates, both from updates of the operating system and from the virus scan program, and patches and updates for our operating systems and our software. So, what is mitigation? One of the only ways that a network can stand a chance against attacks is to do something before the attack is made. Isn't it said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? Well, this means more than just having antivirus and firewalls in place. Those things are great, but they can only stop an attack that's already being made. Really, the best way to protect a network is to set up prevention measures before an attack can happen. The idiom of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure means that you save a huge amount of trouble by preventing the trouble from even happening. So one of the best ways to do that is to mitigate the threats that are made on your network. Mitigation is a word that doesn't just apply to networking, but in this case, we're talking about it in the sense of lessening of a chance of an attack. By using mitigation, you're taking measures to reduce the frequency of attacks, the size of those attacks when and if they take place, how severely, most importantly, they're going to impact your network. We need to have a strategy in place in order to mitigate threats and make life on the network easier. So, step 1 of the mitigation strategy needs to be to set up rules and policies within a network. These are set up by the administrator and need to be agreed upon by all the high-up people on the network and all the high-up people in your corporation. They then need to be told to all of the users. These rules should be standard throughout the network with very few exceptions, because these exceptions easily lead to a breach in security. One of the rules that needs to be set up, for instance, is what can users download, such as applications. Can they download stuff like browsers? Well, some of them are trustable, but are we going to trust people on our network to choose the browsers that are actually worth trusting? The administrator needs to be wary of just about any program that a user could download. And as we learned in the last module, viruses can hide within programs. They don't just attack out of nowhere. A user on your network could easily download a virus without even knowing it, and then they end up infecting not just their computer, but the entire network. So a rule needs to be put in place that says whether or not downloading of applications is allowed, and if it is, from what sources. You may even want to limit the fact that people can download by shutting off their user rights to download or to install programs on their network. If they can't install anything, they can't install a virus. Another major rule, and this is really important, is are they allowed to use outside storage devices such as removable hard drives, thumb drives, flash drives, and storage CDs. Any one of these media storage devices can contain malware. One of the classic examples is someone leaves flash drives in the parking lot. When you find the flash drive, what's the first thing you do? Oh, you say it's a brand new flash drive. I'm going to put it in my computer. I'm going to test it out, see what's on there, see if I can find the owner. Well, the minute they do that, they've just infected your system and your network with a virus. So we need to make sure that even though the person might not be trying or mean to infect the network, they could do it simply because they don't understand the risks that are associated with flash drives and outside storage media. They might also be bringing stuff from their home computer, which very well could have a virus on it. So storage devices could contain malware without the user even knowing it, and this isn't something you want to risk, so a policy is really important. Other things such as this would include stuff like tailgating. When someone logs in, swipes their card to get into a building in the morning, if they open the door for someone else, well, now that person just got in without being audited. They didn't have to swipe their card. So that's a pretty major concern when it comes to security. Another one is something like shoulder surfing or giving out your password. We need to make sure the policies of how passwords are reset, when they're reset, and who you can give them to is fairly important. If I give my password to my wife and suddenly my wife becomes my ex-wife, she could do some major damage to me and to my company by using that password to get access to private information. So step 2 is a mitigation strategy, which is to constantly monitor virus threats. As you might already know, attackers and computer hackers are very well educated when it comes to getting around security systems. This is how they infect networks. And when their attacks are blocked, most of them just update the attack and try a new version. They don't just stop. So this is why the administrator needs to be as on top of the virus versions and attackers and the threats that are out there. It's up to the administrator to make sure that they are up to date and research is being done and they're knowledgeable at the newest attacks that could be coming to their network. Again, it's no one else that's going to get blamed except for the administrator when someone hacks to the network. So not only do we need to monitor our network, we need to monitor the threats that are out there. And this really involves doing research on what the latest and greatest techniques are to hack into a network. Step 3 is user education, which is really, I think, the most important step that we have out there. It's critical to have network users educated in this field so that they know exactly what sort of threats are out there and what safety habits are there as well. There's some safety habits that are obvious, like locking a device and keeping your password secure, but there are other security measures and knowledge that's less obvious but just as important. Network users need to be knowledgeable in how to protect themselves from viruses and how to recognize them so they don't just click on something when it pops up on their browser. First, they personally need to back up their important data because in the event of an attack, perhaps our major system goes down. Alternatively, they need to know that they should be backing up their data to perhaps a central location, or they need to be taught where to back up their data. For instance, to the network share and not to a removable hard drive or not on their desktop. Because if they back it up to their desktop, then what happens when their computer gets broken? Now they've lost all the work they didn't back up automatically to the server. They also need to be diligent about web browsing, what they download, what they click, and so on. If their administrator is going to allow them to download programs, they need to be careful about where they download them from. Again, we always have this interval between responsibility and power. The more powerful you are, the more responsible you have to be. If I can install things on my computer, that also means a hacker could use my information to install something on the computer as well. And finally, if they download a program that seems illegitimate or they think they've been attacked, they need to be able to spot the issue and report it to the administrator before the risky program has a chance to damage. Sometimes they don't want to say anything because they don't want to get in trouble. But if they had said something earlier, we could have prevented more damage. It's really important for them to know when they are being deceived by something and when something is legitimate. So I see this all the time. People send out these emails saying, beware of this. And an easy Google search would show that the thing that they're actually being aware of isn't real. It's something fake. And they've spent time and energy, everyone's time and energy, getting worried about something that actually is not going to affect them. On the other hand, they don't seem to recognize when someone's account has been hacked and is asking for money, when that person would never do that. It's not characteristic. Most of all, they have to check and double check stuff and be willing to ask questions. So here's an example of an extremely common virus that's intended to scam people out of money on the computer that's being infected. The virus takes over your computer and only lets you see this screen or one very similar to it. It claims that the IP address has been used to do very illegal things, and the FBI has seized the computer, and in order to unlock the computer, you have to pay a fine or purchase a code. Now, this virus is extremely intrusive and obviously quite, successfully convincing. Look at all the 7-Eleven, CVS, Rite Aid, all the logos at the bottom, Department of Justice, etc. And the reason they're going to make you pay through MoneyPack, it looks so real, is because that way they know they're getting the money on the other end. So it's important for someone to recognize that this is actually fake. Look on here, it even scares people by saying you have 72 hours to pay the fine or you're going to be arrested. Now, someone might have been doing something like downloading a torrent off the internet, and so they think, oh my god, I'm going to be in trouble, and they don't want to tell you because they think they're going to get in trouble with you as well. We need to make sure that they have a judge-free zone in which they can come tell someone, and that way you could remove the virus and they could go on their way and continue to work. Now, as viruses and malware attacks become more and more advanced, antivirus software improves to combat them. There are thousands of antivirus software, and some are more advanced than you could possibly even imagine. It's not out of the ordinary, however, for antivirus software to have automatic features. So step 4 in the mitigation strategy needs to be to make sure that antivirus systems and software are configured to do things automatically. This means they have to automatically scan the computer, scan the network, and update themselves. We don't want to rely on a human to do this. Very often, when it comes to virus scan, nothing's going to be rolled out automatically that's going to damage our computer. So this stuff needs to happen automatically. When are we going to scan the network? Well, we want it to scan when no one's doing anything. So we want to do it, for instance, at 2 a.m., not at 2 p.m. when people are busy opening things and closing things, and that's when the virus scan program won't be able to get access to 50% of the network, and therefore something could be hiding out. All this eliminates the human element. It allows for more regular and controlled updates in the process, which is important because when we allow humans in, that's when errors occur. Finally, when an update to a program is released, it's generally to address bugs that were found within a previous version. Along with these bugs, there might have been some security weaknesses in the software that need to be addressed, but program updates don't come out very often. In between updates, patches, and so on, there might be a temporary fix that's released or a fix that is manual that have been found. So a patch does exactly what you think it does. It basically covers a hole in the software and temporarily repairs it until an update or a new revision of the software can come out. So as soon as patches or updates are released, the network admin needs to look at them and think about installing them on the network. Now, notice that I don't necessarily want you to just install it right away. I want you to test it and think about it, because the patch or update could very well cause another problem on the computer. And one thing we don't want to do is bring down our system because we put in a new update that suddenly stops our printers from working or something. So we need to balance this with the idea that once the patch and the update is released, the hacker now knows that this is something that they can exploit. And so the longer you wait to update it, the longer you're at risk of being exploited. All right, so we talked about a bunch of things in this module. Some of this is common sense, but these are things that pop up on the Network Plus exam. First, we want to define network mitigation. Mitigation, the word, literally means to lessen. And so what we're doing is we're lessening the threats that can hit us. Some of the steps that we identified in this strategy were first to develop strong policies. For instance, a password policy is important, download policies, internet use policies, and so on and so forth. We also need to monitor threats, not just internal, but we need to research what's going on around the world so we know what the latest things are that are attacking our systems. The most important one, I think, is educating users. Social engineering is how hackers and attackers get around the human element. When there's a human element, there's a flaw. And so we need to educate users so they don't click things that look bad, and they know when to ask questions, since this can help them as well. We also want to automate scanning and updates from virus scan programs and perhaps our firewall. This should all happen automatically, because if we remove the human element, then there's not going to be an issue. We also want scans to happen in the middle of the night when no one else is using it, for instance 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. Make sure that you give enough time for the scanner to actually scan the entire system. Finally, we need patches and updates, and we want to balance the patches and the updates with the patch actually doing harm versus the weakness or exploit that it's correcting. The longer we wait to employ a new patch or update, the longer we're at risk.
Advanced threat mitigation. Managing your signatures, hardening your devices, in terms of security that is, changing your native VLAN, switch port protection, restricting access with access lists, honeypot and honeynet, penetration testing. So signatures, in terms of signature management, we're talking about IDS and IPS, which we've covered earlier. The signature-based detection examines network traffic for pre-configured and predetermined attacks. So the signature is the thing that is matched against in these devices, the threat signature. These are known as signatures. Attacker convinces the employee to disclose confidential information. If a known signature is identified by the system, an alarm is triggered or the traffic will be blocked. This depends on how you've configured your IDS and IPS. So it will either send an SNMP alert or create some sort of log message or whatever you've designed it to do. The signature codes are updated, or they should be updated regularly for new or false patterns. You really don't want false positives either, because it's just going to mean traffic's blocked when it shouldn't be. There's a website called threatconnect.com. They offer some sort of signature management system for you to look after all your signatures. I only suggest it because I use their graphic and I wanted to credit them for that. But this is what came up when I was researching threat signatures. Device hardening. This is part of your daily, weekly, monthly admin task, especially if you're in charge of security for looking after your network. You'll patch or update software or firmware in your hardware devices. Check for non-compliant passwords. This will obviously be part of your password policy, but I'm sure you've logged into something or had an email updating you saying that your current password isn't strong enough and you need to update it. Removing redundant networks and IP addresses. Strangely enough, I've known equipment found years after people thought it had been decommissioned. It's sitting in a office somewhere, plugged into the network, and nobody knew it was there. And this can be a backdoor for hackers to find and get into your network. Changing security keys. Changing the native VLAN. So the native VLAN is used for any untagged traffic on your network. You'll be familiar with this when you start doing Cisco configuration or any type of Juniper or other network management. Big security vulnerability. Your native VLAN passes important information such as your Cisco Discovery Protocol or the equivalent, which is device information, your operating system that it's running, etc., etc. Dynamic trunking protocol is for trunking. So your native VLAN will normally go across a trunk link, and you've got all of this important information. On the Cisco devices, certainly, and probably a lot of other vendors, the native VLAN is VLAN 1. And if you leave this as the VLAN that the switches can communicate with, you've left a possible security vulnerability, because this traffic is actually untagged. So what you want to do is, on any trunk link, you change it to an unused VLAN. So this is one that isn't being used on, so you've got to VLAN 10, 20, 30 and 40. You would use your an unused VLAN on your trunk links, for example, 222, just something fairly high, and then on another trunk link to another switch, you'd have another VLAN, for example, 223, etc. Here is the output for a Cisco device, and you can see this is trunking, so it's passing multiple VLANs on this link, but the native VLAN is VLAN 1. So I've wiped over it there. The native VLAN is VLAN 1, which you don't want. So what I did, I went to the trunk interface here. I issued the command switchport trunk native VLAN 5. You'll probably use something higher, like I said, like 222, but it's just to illustrate the point. So this traffic that passes over the native VLAN will use VLAN 5. It won't use VLAN 1. And you've got to be careful, because you can't delete VLAN 1. It's there all the time. You just don't have to use it to pass any traffic. And now you can see it's changed from VLAN 1 as default to VLAN 5. I've already mentioned all this, sorry. So another thing mentioned is BPDU guard. This has arrived in the syllabus. BPDU guard, it's on an interface. The port is error disabled when a BPDU is received. So bridge protocol data unit we talked about earlier. This is used for spanning tree traffic. And it can actually change your layer 2 topologies. For example, let's say this switch is the root. You've got a high powered switch here, and it would normally be a multi-layer switch here, and all of your traffic is pointing to this device. But what will happen is this device will announce a number to say I am the boss, and say, for example, this is number 99. This is the number that determines the route of all your spanning tree traffic. Well, what happens is, if this device connects to the network, say you've found it on a shelf at work, and for some crazy reason all you've done is plug it in, and this has happened, by the way, I've seen it happen. Well, this device could actually be configured with the number 100 in terms of spanning tree, and what could happen is then, this could be a really low switch that's worth about, say, $100, and it's just got a tiny amount of processing power. All of your spanning tree traffic all of a sudden will be converging onto this tiny little switch. The CPU will go from almost nothing through the roof. It'll probably crash, bringing down your entire local area network, and at that point you'll probably be out of a job, to be honest. So what happens is, with BPDU guard, you configure it on this interface here, for example, fast Ethernet 10, and if a BPDU frame is seen coming in onto this particular interface, it will error disable it, and it won't pass traffic until you, the network administrator, will shuts it manually, and then manually no shuts the interface, so you have to re-enable it. Root guard. So I mentioned if this is a topology where it's actually, I think from my CCNA book, where I'm telling you on what interfaces, depending on the topology, you would add BPDU guard. Root guard you would add down here on these level of interfaces. So these are your layer 3 switches, and these images here represent layer 2. Root guard is configured per port, so you wouldn't configure it on a device and expect the configuration to be passed out through your network, unlike other configurations. Root ports are the closest to the spanning tree master. These ports are furthest away. If this is the master here in my topology, these are the ports that you would want to be root, and it's basically saying the root equals best path to take to the master. This is not the best path to take to the master. This would cause you a lot of problems. This is why you would enable root guard on these ports here. So it will monitor for incoming bridge protocol data units, and it prevents the port from becoming a root port. How it does it, you can learn a bit more when you do Cisco, CCNA and CCNP, etc. DHCP snooping. This is the legitimate one here. This is the rogue that somebody's attached it to your network, or they've downloaded some code accidentally onto their device, and it's trying to take over as the DHCP server for this segment of your network, which you don't want to happen. It forces the switch here to examine and filter inappropriate DHCP messages. So if this switch detects it coming on this port, you've configured this port here as untrusted, and you know which ports you trust because you're the network administrator. This port, so it comes in and that is permitted through. Untrusted, it comes in and blocked, and then you would normally get notified as the administrator that hang on, something's not quite right here, with a text, phone call or other type of alert. VLANs, these separate your host into functions. So here you've got the sales team, your accounting team, the IT team, and then your human resources. And what this does, and it depends on the design methodology you're following, by the way, there's a whole bunch of ways to design your network depending on which vendor you're speaking to, but we've separated ours into functions. Now, if there's a broadcast, say there's a fault on the network card for this device here, then the broadcast traffic, because each VLAN has its own network address, so say that's in 10.10, 10.20, 10.30 and 10.40. So these are all different subnets, and in order for these to communicate, you'd either have to have a layer 3 module in this switch, or the switch would be connected to a router, as we've spoken about earlier. If there's a broadcast through this faulty network card here, it's basically restricted to all devices on this VLAN, and then what would happen is your phone would go, somebody would call tech support, and it would help you in your troubleshooting, because the broadcast isn't affecting everyone here, but basically you're told that everyone in the sales team is getting a really slow network response, and then this is known as the divide and conquer method of troubleshooting. You know that everyone here is affected, and then so you'd be looking at these ports on the switch. You could use the sniffer, the network sniffer, and you'd probably quite quickly see the IP address .1 is sending out normal amount of traffic, and then it's gone through the roof, whereas all the other devices on this particular segment are sending a normal amount of traffic. Access lists, these can be used to block an entire network or subnet, one particular host or a number of hosts, a particular port number or a protocol. So ICMP or whatever you want. Port numbers can be anything, DHCP, DNS, host, .1, and then obviously entire networks. So it's a list of permitted or denied traffic. So if you don't worry about the text here, because you're not expected to know this for the exam, you've created an access list and you've said deny this traffic ICMP and permit IP traffic. And what happens is the access list are always processed top to bottom. I've only got two entries on this, so it'll be pretty quick actually. But as soon as the access list reaches a line, so say it's ICMP traffic, it would reach this particular line and then it would be a match and it would be denied. The access list wouldn't go all the way to the bottom. If it's not ICMP traffic, it would reach the next item on your list, and the chances are it's going to be some other sort of IP traffic and it would be permitted. Honeypot, honeynet. Honeypots attract possible attackers into an isolated environment. So this is your attacker and it's a potential victim, and what they don't know, or they should know, is they've actually been fooled into redirecting into this honeynet system. They can't do any harm in this place, and what you can do is, this is a pair of binoculars. I know it's absolutely dreadful, isn't it? This is you as the network administrator watching what they do. You'll obviously be doing it via whatever software. You can see what commands they're executing and trying to inject pieces of code, and this whole environment here is protected, is segmented off from your network, and then that lets you design a series of steps to protect your network. So you're analysing the behaviour and gathering the information. If it's a honey net, it's basically a chain of honey pots. So you've got your honey pot here, but what you've done is you've chained them together for whatever reason. Usually placed in network segments. This will be isolated by your firewall. So they're coming in and they get redirected to your firewall. This is actually your local area network over here. Pen testing. CompTIA have actually got the pen test certification out. I'm looking into adding it now. So keep your eyes open. It scans your network in order to find ports or protocols with flaws. I've talked about this kind of stuff before. Part of your regular security auditing process. So say every Monday you carry out this particular test on your network. It can simulate a type of attack, and it's well recommended that you do this. So we've covered a lot of stuff here. Managing your signatures, device hardening, changing your native VLAN, must do, protecting your ports. We looked at protecting it from the STP packets coming in, the bridge protocol data units, so it doesn't become a root, or and it doesn't change the it doesn't become a root port, and it doesn't become the STP root either. Both very bad things for your network. Access lists, honeypot and honeynet, and then penetration testing. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching.